But sanctions don't work. Yesterday I was interviewed and I was quoted as saying, and I believe it, sanctions are an act of war. When you place sanctions on a country, I mean, did the sanctions really help Americans or help the Iraqis after 10 years of sanctions on the Iraqi citizens, where children would die because of the denial of food and drugs? No, that's no way to do it. We should be trading with people. We should be trading with Cuba. I mean, this is a much better approach than saying, that we can intimidate people, but we do not have to be isolationists. That's a false charge when they say, oh, isolationism, we want to withdraw. And I don't want to. Matter of fact, I don't like protectionism. I like trade. I like low tariffs. Tariffs are taxes. We want to trade with the world and talk with the world. And we want to talk to people. If Kennedy could talk to Khrushchev at the height of the Cold War and literally agree that, yes, the Soviets would take the missiles out of Cuba, and we would take the missiles out of Turkey, and guess what? We didn't have a nuclear war. That to me sends a message that even with all the misconstruing of what Ahmadinejad has charged, that maybe we can talk to people. I mean, why can't we talk? I think people who can't talk are too weak. They do it from a sense of weakness. But there are a lot of things that we must do. I think a change in foreign policy, and just recently I introduced legislation that's called the American Freedom Agenda, which deals with about 10 points about our attack on civil liberties, dealing with our position on the FISA courts, our position on torture, our position on secret prisons, and using testimony that's kept secret, and we don't hear the person or see and know the person who is making the charges, and whether it has to do with torture and habeas corpus, all of these things. This bill deals with this, because this is the true undermining of our liberties here at home. And it has been well said that in times of war, that we are more likely to lose our liberty. And there was one individual that wrote, Randolph Bourne wrote, "War is the health of the state." And I believe that. And if you don't have a war, sometimes they want to generate the sensation of a war, even if it's a fictitious war. Like, how can you have war against a tactic, and how can it be perpetual? And that's what they're telling us about the war on terrorism, that we have to be prepared so that we as Americans sacrifice our liberties. And this is all connected to the monetary system and to our economic system, because if we don't change our ways and we don't change our attitude on foreign policy and monetary policy and economic policy, we are going to go broke. We're going to go broke not because our government won't send out the checks, but when the government sends out the checks, they won't buy anything anymore. And my proposal is not to attack those who are dependent on the government. Although theoretically I can make the case that it would be much better for individuals to be able to work hard and have an incentive, with the additional caveat by saying that if you work hard and you earn a good living, you ought to have the right to keep everything you earn, and that, of course, is why I oppose the income tax.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you don't have to, even I, who would work for a transition to a government designed mainly to protect our liberties, I would say don't turn anybody out in the street. But what we would have to do is literally change the foreign policy where we can save hundreds of billions of dollars from all this activity we have overseas. Put some of it toward the deficit and make sure that we take care of the people who have become dependent on government programs. We don't have to we live in an age today that is very precarious because we as a people have lost our confidence in freedom. We now think that freedom really doesn't work. Freedom doesn't work because there's always somebody that's going to fall through the cracks, and we can't trust the people to take care of themselves. So we not only are now encroaching on our freedom of speech, and of course we get involved even in our churches now on what we can say in our churches and synagogues and in our mosques. If you say something political, that you might be held accountable for that. If that is the case, that then there's an encroachment on our civil liberties there. But I have never accepted the idea that governments ought to tell us exactly what we should do with our bodies. I don't think governments are good protectors in any way whatsoever. But freedom does assume one thing, and that is responsibility for ourselves, responsibility for our actions. But of course, we have to suffer the consequences, but we also would benefit from the things that we do. We would be a more prosperous and we would be a more enlightened society. We would be able then to help so many more people. Today, though, we have a shrinking economy. We are getting poorer. We have prosperity, but it's based on debt today. It's not based now on productivity. It's based on debt and borrowing, and depending on the fact that we think the people are going to take the dollar forever. So there's a fictitious element associated with this idea that we are so wealthy and so well-to-do. So we are now entering a precarious phase. We need confidence and an understanding of how freedom works. Now, the most magnificent thing that I have found out during this campaign has been how many young people have been very receptive to what I'm talking about. They don't like the idea that we're the policemen of the world. They don't like the idea that they might have to go fight because they know the selective service is still there and they may be drafted. They don't like the idea that they're inheriting all this debt and obligation and this demand that they pay into Social Security knowing they're not going to get anything out of it. So young people love this message, especially when they find out you can be a good conservative, a traditionalist, you can believe in the Constitution, you can even look into the traditions of the Republican Party and feel good about this philosophy. And young people are joining by leaps and bounds, and this message is spreading not only throughout the country, far and beyond what we as a campaign are able to do. It's being spread, and the groups that are developing and forming are being formed on the internet. So this message is spreading, and it's growing. It's been a source of great fundraising, and also it's actually spreading, to my utter amazement, around the world. People even in other countries love freedom. Yeah. And that is great. It is a great message. And that to me is the way the message should be spread. Not through our mights and through dictators to come and we tell people what to do. It just doesn't work that way. So we have a tremendous opportunity right now because it is up to us to decide what kind of government that we want. And to me it's very simple. We want the government that we were given. It wasn't a perfect government. It's not perfect now, but basically it was a very, very good constitution. We've ignored it. The Congress has ignored it. The executive branch has ignored it. The judicial branch has ignored it. But the basic fundamentals are still there. All we have to do is get men of high character, enough to go to Washington, whether it's in the presidency or in the Congress, enough character to actually believe their oath of office, to believe in the rule of law. Today, the rule of law doesn't mean very much. We can change our Constitution, but if we want the Constitution to do, we want the federal government to do more than the Constitution allows, we can't just start doing it. So if you want a government to take over medical care and education, which I have my reservations about, we should at least change the Constitution. Because if we ignore that part of the Constitution, then lo and behold, what do? We end up going to war without even bother consulting with the American people through the Congress. We go to war with allowing a president to do it, and allowing the president to act in the name of the people without a declaration of war. This has been my argument about this war all along. I never wanted to go to war. I thought it was useless and foolish. But I held him to the fire and even brought this up in the committee. And I said, if you want to go to war properly. Declare the war so everybody knows what we're doing. But they wouldn't do that. They wouldn't debate the war. They said, no, let the president decide. He knows he knows whether we or not should use this force or not. But, you know, I believe if we'd have done it the other way, we'd have had a debate and we wouldn't have gone to war. Today, we go to war, it goes badly, it costs too much money, nobody's happy with us, and then what do? We start to debate. And now everybody's debating this. Who told me this? Somebody told me this, and I was misled, and somebody told me a lie, and on again.